Hello, horror fans, and welcome back to the Script to Scream podcast, where we delve into the spine-tingling world of horror cinema. Each week, we look at the scariest scenes, unmask the deeper meanings behind your favorite horror films, and explore the psychology of fear that keeps us coming back for more.
From script analysis to scene breakdowns, we'll be dissecting your favorite horror movies to see just what makes them tick. So whether you're a seasoned horror aficionado or just starting to explore the genre, join us as we unravel the spine-tingling stories that haunt the silver screen.
I'm Will.
And I'm Lee.
So for those of you that may be new to the show, why not check out our website, scripttoscreampodcast.com, where you can now find a lot more insight into the scripts and films that we cover. We've added scarology graphs to illustrate the scares in each of the films and annotated script excerpts to highlight some of the ideas and concepts we cover when dissecting the screenplays. So if you want to go deeper on your favorite scripts, there's more to interest and entertain over at scripttoscream.com. Also, if you like what we're doing here on Script to Scream, please like and share the episodes if you can. It only takes a moment, but it really helps us reach new people. And if you're enjoying the show and really feel generous, leaving a review is amazing for us. So that would be awesome. But for now, Lee, it's good to see you, buddy. What have you been watching, dude?
I've been mainly catching up with Welcome to Derry, but I did check out a little film called Popeye the Slayer Man.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So first things first, what's Derry like? Does it hold a candle to the films?
It's pretty good, man. I mean, the show does throw a few really cool curveballs at you, and some of the manifestations of it are really fucking cool. There's also some great throwbacks and Easter eggs to the It films and the whole Stephen King shared universe as a whole.
Wait, hang on a minute. Does Stephen King have a shared universe now?
I mean, in the big man's defense, this isn't some attempt at a Marvel-esque shoe-in. The seeds of this have been planted in King's work for decades, and it's really cool to see some of them here.
Okay, nice. What's your favorite King book, Lee?
It, hands down, one of, if not my favorite book of all time. You?
Dude, truth be told, I haven't read any. I did buy a cheap copy of The Dead Zone once, and I do have The Stand on my shelf, but chances are, dude, I'm not going to get to them anytime soon.
You numpty. The Stand especially it's a fucking great book. But there is one thing about the show that's kind of grating on me a little bit, though.
Okay, let me guess. Is it the lack of Pennywise?
No. I mean, Pennywise is just one manifestation of the Eater of Worlds. You know, the coolest one, obviously, but you've got to keep some of your best shit in reserve, you know? Now, the thing that's annoying me is some of the CGI is just plain bad, dude. I think it was episode 3, and there was one part near the climax where the special effects were so bad, it just took me right out of the scene, and I'm talking jarringly, noticeably terrible.
Oh, dear. That's never a good thing, man.
Yeah, I mean, the It movies, you know, they also had a reliance on some ropey CGI over practical effects, but, you know, for some reason, it's just really bad here. But on the flip side, though, most of the other CGI is actually pretty good. It's if not serviceable, though it would still have been better if done practically, I think. But all in all, the series has been hugely enjoyable, and I'm hoping that the whole 3-series plan they have does come to fruition.
Okay, that sounds cool. So how about, and I have to say, Lee, it feels batshit crazy to be saying this. How was Popeye the Slayer Man? Was that any good?
It was fucking awful, but I still quite enjoyed it. You know, the joy of bad movies.
Oh, dude, I do. Don't tell anyone, Lee, but I do have a secret love of bad films.
Nice. What's been on your screens, dude?
Well, this week I watched the new Del Toro Frankenstein, which I thought was good overall, bar one or two sort of small gripes. I also watched a Fellini film. I'm a massive Fellini fan, Lee, and I got to watch a film called La Strada, which I hadn't watched up until now. Ever watched La Strada, Lee?
Is that the one with the saucy dancing?
That's Lambada, dude. Anyway, La Strada is a really wonderful film. It's a film that stars Fellini regular Guietta Messina and the wonderful Anthony Quinn. And this one, Lee, I have to say, it was just a joy. It was sad, it was kind of poignant, but just a delightful, delightful film. I thought it was wonderful. Anyway, that's enough small talk. It's time for the main event of the evening as we unleash our first ever original versus remake face off.
In the red corner, the 1974 original classic. The script, written by Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel, weighs in at 104 pages, and the film, directed by Tobe Hooper, is one of the most controversial of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And in the blue corner, the young contender, the 2003 remake, originating from a 109-page script written by Scott Kosar and directed by Marcus Nispel. This film not only brought the story to a modern audience, but unleashed a tidal wave of genre remakes and proved popular enough to earn itself a direct prequel. Put your hands together for the slick modern take on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, with our fighters ready and our team of expert analysts and judges set the score of this epic battle, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Nicely. Okay, so for this face-off, we'll be looking through a list of criteria for both films and their respective screenplays. There will be no numbered scoring system at play here, just a simple winner, lose, draw in each category. And at the end of the show, whichever script and film has the highest number of wins will be declared the winner. In the event of a tie, we will use one of the wildcard categories sneakily held in reserve. So we'll begin the fight by comparing both versions of the script in 4 distinct areas. And while some of these categories can be applied to both script and film, we've done our best to divide them accordingly. Now, first up, and I'm feeling somewhat shallow with this one, Lee, it's presentation and visual appeal.
Yeah, it might feel shallow, Bud, but a script's visual appeal can be a massive factor in whether or not it can move beyond the reader's stage. If a script is difficult to read and ugly to look at, consisting of long chunks of unbroken text, it may never make it past the script reader and falter at the pearly gates of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's so true, but it still makes me feel a tad superficial and snobbish, you know?
Yeah, I man, but it is what it is. And I'll be honest, both of these scripts are something of an eyesore. The original is heaped with long, chunky action lines and overwritten descriptions. But as I said during our Texas Chainsaw Massacre 74 episode, I think it does unintentionally capture the essence of the film really well. The remake script does suffer from the fact that the version we were able to procure feels like a composite of several different drafts. So I don't think it's fair to judge it too harshly on that factor. Ultimately, I feel that the remake is a much leaner and much more visually appealing, so I am going to give this one to the remake. How about you?
Yeah, so for the most part, I really agree. I have to admit, I actually found the Hooper kind of Henkel script quite a slog to read. I think I sort of mentioned that in the episode, but there are these massive chunks of description with kind of nothing to break them up, and it does actually make reading the scripts quite laborious. The remake makes for far kind of swifter reading, and it's much more aligned to my own personal tastes with regard to white space. There are 2 things which I'm struggling over, though. Firstly, I actually really loved seeing some of the notes in the '03 draft. I just thought they were really insightful into the process of rewrites and revisions writers have to go through. And I kind of agree that there is something quite delightful about the '74 script in that it felt like this was done on a typewriter by some, really enthusiastic young filmmakers looking to sort of break through and make a splash. And there's something really charming about that, I think, despite its kind of big blocks of text and all of that. So overall, I think, and despite my better judgment, Lee, despite the slog of it and all the typos and the font, lack of formatting, I think I'm going to have to give this to the '74 script, dude, because I think there's something really charming about where these writers were when they wrote it. But I also kind of love how a script, which is such a slog to read, was turned into a movie like with such energy, So original for me, dude.
Well, color me surprised.
Really? Okay. Well, next up in this veritable war of words, it's structure and pacing.
Okay, this is an easy one for me. While the original comes off as something of a chaotic word vomit of creativity, the remake is both clearly structured and I think offers a far more balanced pacing than the original, which intentionally seems to run on only two gears, slow and 150 miles an hour. There's a point in the original where the film just switches gears and never lets up, whereas in the remake, the tension gradually builds after a much more effective inciting incident. So, therefore, I'm giving this one to the remake. What do you say?
Yeah, on this one, I have to agree with you, Lee. I think the O3 script has a much better and more kind of accessible narrative structure. The inciting incident is stronger and clearer. And as you say, it kind of builds the tension in a more considered and structured way. I think the pacing of the remake is much more balanced and it ebbs and flows in a more conventional fashion. As I said previously, I do love the rawness of the original script and its kind of youthful exuberance. But for me, the remake script edges it here in terms of structure and pacing, man.
Yeah, we're on the same page on this one, bud. I appreciate the original script and all, but I think, the goddamn traditional education has kind of biased me somewhat now.
Nice, man. Okay, so let's move on to our third category. This is themes and subtext we can find on the page.
Okay, so this is a much closer call, in my opinion. The original wonderfully exposes the collapse of capitalism and the American dream. The Sawyer family, their livelihoods gone, literally feed off the younger generation to sustain themselves. This is especially clear in the fossilized grandpa drinking blood from Sally's finger. In the remake, though, with Sheriff Hoyt arguably taking the role as the primary antagonist, the theme shifts more into corruption of authority and the harshness of the industrial machine. This time, the youth isn't fighting the ghosts of the nuclear family, they are battling a corrupt society itself. I think this shift is clearest in our two final girls. In the original, Sally, bless her heart, is very much a passive creature. She reacts to her environment rather than taking the initiative. Her struggle isn't won through battle, it's earned via endurance. Whereas Erin from the remake is very much an active protagonist. She survives due to her actions and choices, and as a result, is rewarded by killing and maiming her captors and rescuing a kidnapped child. Because she takes control and rejects victimhood, she thrives, whereas poor Sally merely survives. Because of the two very different yet very effective takes, I think I'm going to call this one a draw.
Hmm, interesting. Okay, well, I mean, as you know, Lee, I found the remake at the time of watching, at least, to be fairly devoid of any real meaning. Now, that said, having listened to you talk about the films and hearing your take, I do think the remake has some themes which, it is obviously kind of investigating and picking apart. So I just want to say that. I think this may be just down to the way kind of I watched the films, possibly. I mean, I watched the original first, and I thought the themes were much, much clearer, and I
Mm.
thought it wore its themes on its sleeve, if you like. I think I watched the remake the next day and found it to be dude, I found it to be kind of somewhat vacuous at the time.
Yeah.
I have to hold my hands up though and say I stand corrected on that one, and I think your take on these two films is probably far more astute than anything that I've come up with. I think Sally is making choices in the original, to be fair to her. I mean, she's jumping out of windows, she's trying to survive and doing a lot of screaming. Erin has more, I think Erin has more choices to make, because not all of her companions are dead.
Yeah.
And she does sort of fight back in a way which I would say is more kind of empowering. But again, I do take your point here that Sally just kind of survives and Erin seemingly earns her survival in a more proactive way. I think, for me, in retrospect, it is interesting how these films reflect American society and culture in the time they were made. You could posit that in 1973, 74, when the original was made, America hadn't quite gone through the 70s and kind of all the disillusionment that that decade brought about. So the themes are much more a reaction to what was happening coming out of the sort of the late 60s and the worries about industry and family values and feeding off the youth with regards to kind of Vietnam and all of those kind of themes that the late 60s and early 70s brought to the fore. I think the remake really shows us that the disillusionment of the 70s has kind of bedded in deep, it's dug in like an Alabama tick at
Hmm.
this point. And of course, 0203, 9/11 has happened, and the initial kind of response has happened. So you can see a more kind of cynical view of authority coming through in that film, I think.
Yeah.
Interesting that they've transposed those themes onto the 70s setting as well. I think it works, but maybe it works better with hindsight in a way. I don't think Nixon had left office when the original was written, which was an example of kind of a real kind of corruption of authority, if you like. I felt in the two scripts, the original references theme within its dialogue much in a much more obvious way, whereas with the remake, and maybe this is probably a reflection of the way filmmaking and audiences kind of cinematic literacy has progressed, not mine clearly, but the remake seems to use its characters to explore its themes. So it's possibly more kind of subtle and sophisticated in its approach. So I'm torn, dude, but I think I'm going to have to go with my uncorrected self and give it to the original.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair, bud. No arguments from me yet.
Nice. Okay. So up next is our final script category. And that, my friend, is dialogue.
The make or break for many a film and the bane of a screenwriter's existence, the dreaded D. So straight off the bat, there is no Sorkin-esque quality dialogue in either of these bad boys. But let's be real. If you sit down to watch a film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre to study dialogue, there is no hope for you whatsoever. Having said that, there is a clear difference between the two films. The original uses a very naturalistic voice. The dialogue is often mundane and offers the viewer an almost kind of voyeuristic ear. For the most part, the characters chat about the most irrelevant shit, horoscopes, work, some flirtation here and there. It adds an air of believability to the film's already documentary feel. The remake, however, is far more stylized. You feel like you're watching a movie, not just eavesdropping on a bunch of hapless teens on a road trip. The banter is more cutting, and threats are vocally as effective as they are physically. This is a close one for me, but due to personal preference, I'm going to lean into the stylized wordplay of the remake for this one. How about you, dude?
Well, again, I think we're again pretty much in agreement on this one, and have kind of come up on different sides of the decision tree, which is slightly strange. I mean, I actually think the naturalistic dialogue in the original is kind of truer to the characters, and like you
Mm.
said, adds an aura of believability and does create a kind of more naturalistic documentary feel, which for me actually heightens the peril and the horror of what happens to the characters. Like these are just normal kids whose day has, gone totally turned into something absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the stylization of the remake, for my taste, was just like a bit too smart, and that was to me to the detriment of the kind of engagement with the film, and it also kind of affected my empathy for the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing gets me more riled than, a smart ass kind of wisecracking, too cool for school kind of teenager. You know what I'm saying? Um, I mean, some of the characters in the remake are just annoying wankers. There's no two ways about it. I'm rooting for some of these little fucks to get chainsawed. You know what I'm saying? I'm torn on this one. I think it's purely on personal preference. And because of the atmosphere that it creates, I'm going to give it to the original, dude.
Okay, fair enough. Again, while I don't fully agree with you here, I can see where you're coming from.
Okay, that's nicely. Thank you for that. Appreciate. It's nice to know that I'm not talking complete bollocks. That's good. So with the script only categories done, let's move into the wider, more film centric categories, starting with the biggie, Lee, direction.
Ah, yes, the other big D. I think for most people, this is going to come down to personal preference. I mean, Hooper's original is shot in a very documentarian kind of way. It's low budget, means that there are a few extravagant shots, but that works in the film's favor, I think. The camera work is very basic, yet extremely effective, and the whole thing is grounded in a very realistic, gritty overture. The remake is far more polished, from Nispel's blatant MTV panning shots to the cold lighting. This thing looks like $1 million, which, when compared to the original, I think does hurt the film sometimes. But the higher budget does allow for some really cool shots. The best, I think, being the through the hole headshot just after the hitchhiker's demise. And this is a really tough call for me, but I think the original takes it. But it's close.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Now, I think for me, this is all about personal preference, like you said as well, and I think it's worth considering what each director is kind of actually making you feel. I mean, as you say, Hooper has kind of leaned into his limitations. He's made a raw, kind of low budget heart pounder, which at the time was, something that hit like Leatherface's hammer, right? I mean, there are some really interesting stylistic choices in the original as well, which are really interesting and quite disturbing, very distinctive, I think. The original feels very grimy and sweaty, and I think it's very evocative and effective. And Hooper's obviously working with limitations, but he's eking everything he can out of those limitations. The practical effects are crude, but not a lot is actually shown in terms of gore. The actors Hooper is working with are way more on the sort of amateurish side of the scale, but he does get some pretty, committed performances out of them. The original is, whether it's to your taste or not, regarded as an absolute classic of cinema as well. So if you say to someone, have you seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Which movie do you think they're referring to?
Yeah.
And it's the original, right? I mean, I think that says something. Now, I think the remake, to be absolutely fair, looks sensational. I mean, I think it's way more polished in terms of its style, and obviously has a much bigger budget that they're working with. There are some really great things about that, but I'm not sure it made me kind of really feel anything. I wouldn't look at that film and say, wow, that's something original, or Nispel has made that film his own, or that the film was really kind of distinctive. For me, I mean, despite its obvious polish, it does lack a little bit of personality and a little bit of kind of originality. That's not to criticize kind of Nispel at all. He's working with a bigger budget. He has a bigger crew. He has a much kind of greater responsibility, and is working in an industry which values the kind of style which he is clearly a fantastic kind of purveyor of. The guy clearly has an amazing talent, and the film looks, as I say, just sensational. I think he does get some really great performances from his actors, Jessica Biel and Jonathan Tucker especially. And the pacing of the film is fine. The way this sort of exposition is revealed is fine. It just doesn't really kind of make me feel much of anything, really. I imagine if we're sort of chatting about this randomly and I said, did you see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake? I'd get back a kind of, yeah, man. And I'd say, what did you think? And you said, yeah, it was all right. It was pretty cool. But if I asked you, like, did you see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original? I get back something like, oh my God, that was fucking buck wild, or, that was batshit crazy, or, oh my God, I had to turn it off. So I don't know, man. For me, the original gets it just because it's so original, and it's not. I feel the remake is something of a cash in, if you know what I mean. I mean, maybe that's a bit harsh, but whereas the original is just like fucking boom, what a movie. It's like, just take that and fuck off. So for me, it's like the original for me, dude, I think. Anyway, next up, it's cinematography and visual style, Lee.
Okay. So, I mean, talk about polar opposites. We've got the harsh, gritty style of the original versus the slick MTV style visuals of the remake. I mean, the original movie, dude, you could feel the heat on screen, from the opening image of the sun's corona to the baking corpses putrefying in the midday burn. There's decay everywhere, rotting animal corpses, bone sculptures, grandpa. It's almost like the film is rotting away in front of you. Whereas the remake, it has some of this. I mean, returning cinematographer Daniel Pearl builds on the original while staying true to Nispel's modernized vision. It still feels hot, but it's sexy hot. Like the antagonists are all gorgeous and buff, are just sweaty enough to sheen up their chiseled abs, you know?
Do you have a preference?
Oh, I do, man. And I'll be honest, in this case, it's not even close. The original takes this for me, hands down.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, I mean, this is interesting because, we have the same DOP on both films. And so much of this, I think, is about kind of budget and technology and, obviously the director's vision, right? I think the cinematography is great on both films. It's obviously different, but both films are photographically very skillful and interesting. The cinematography for both films feel like a product of their kind of budget and the resources, but also a product of the technology available and obviously the time when they were made. The original is obviously, really low budget and the people are at the start of their careers and it's independent film and so on. And I think that shows. And the remake has a much kind of larger budget and greater resources and stylistically feels a product of its time. Like you say, that sort of MTV, music video sort of style. I think both films feel like they're a product of their directors' visions as well. And they're very different in terms of their presentation. To me, the remake looks better, kind of objectively, but does feel blander, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I think the original kind of looks cruder, but feels like a better fit for the story in a way. It's
Hmm.
grimy and it's grainy, it's hot and sweaty, like you say, and it's more kind of immediate and in some way more evocative in the ways that I sort of mentioned earlier. So, I mean, it's a toughie, but I'm going to give it to the original because I think it makes the film more terrifying. And the point of this is to create kind of an absorbing filmic experience and to intensify the feelings of horror and danger and fear. And the original for me does that in a better way. But that's just for me personally.
Yeah, nice. I think I'm on the same page as you on that one.
Cool, man. Okay, so up next, we'll be taking a closer look at the acting and performances of the cast across the two films. So, where are you on this, Lee?
Nice. Okay, so the original, as you said before, used largely unknown actors that were available for a small fee, and for the most part, it shows. The performances vary from wooden to comically manic. The two exceptions being Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface and Marilyn Burns as Sally. We'll talk more on Hansen and Leatherface in a bit, but for now, let's focus on Burns as Sally. So Burns's performance is particularly memorable as an exercise in suffering. I mean, this poor girl did not merely star in this film, she survived it. From the arduous shooting hours and blistering heat to the physical and mental punishment she had to endure, the Sally we see on screen is raw and impactful because it's an exaggeration of Burns' own state of mind at the time. So jump forward to the remake, and there's no such on-screen trauma to batter us down. Instead, we have well-paid, trained actors doing what well-paid, trained actors do. And as a result, the performances are much more believable. Where the original only feels believable in its darkest moments of sheer terror, we are kind of drawn into the story much quicker in the remake due to its multifaceted cast. Besides Ermi, who again we'll circle back to in a bit, there are no real standout performances like Sally from the original, but each cast member is more than capable of holding their own and provides us with a score of protagonists whom we are far more inclined to care about. Therefore, I am going to give this one to the remake.
Interesting. Nice one, Lee. I agree. There is a stark kind of contrast between the levels of skill in the performances in these films. And I think, as you've mentioned, the ability of the actors in the remake is head and shoulders above the ability of the actors in the original in creating kind of nuanced characters and their performances are far more kind of professional with regards to sort of their emotional range and their subtlety. I think there is more that goes into caring about characters than simply performance. I think the script, obviously, the style, etc., goes a long way into creating characters that an audience connects with and cares about. I do think the performances in the remake are objectively better. I think Beale, Tucker, and Ermi all give great turns, and all the cast, to be honest, do sort of really well. So I think I'm going to have to agree, dude, and give this one. I think the remake takes this one.
Yeah.
Um, that said, with the possible exception of Beale, I didn't give two shits about, about any of the characters in the remake. I don't know what that says, but there it is.
I'll tell you what, though, I bet you gave a shit about whether Hoyt lived or died.
But yeah, it was kind of good to see him die.
So you
Yeah,
kind of did care about him as a
that's
character.
true. That's true. You've picked a hole in my my explanation there, Lee. Dastardly work. Okay, so next up we have sound design and score.
Okay, so this is an interesting one. You know, the originals, highly experimental industrial SFX, or the remakes, more traditional orchestral metal stylings. It's worth highlighting for those that have forgotten or have yet to watch our initial episodes covering the films.
Shame.
Shame indeed. That the original film is largely devoid of any real musical score. Instead, we have the clangs and scrapes and screeches of industrial style sound effects, the purpose of which is to unsettle and unnerve you, and it's a trick that works to perfection. Every screech and shriek is there to put your teeth on edge, but the film is also powerful in its lack of music and sound effects. In the harrowing scene where Leatherface pursues Sally, the only sounds are the constant roar of the chainsaw and Sally's harsh guttural screams. And this lack of music really drives home the realism and grittiness of the film. On the flip side, where the remake does include snippets of this practice, the film rises and falls with the dramatic swell of emotional music. You know, tension is built using deep rumbling beats that build to crashing crescendos. It's textbook, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it just doesn't hit the same, at least not for me. And that's why I'm giving this one to the original. Or what do you think?
Yeah, dude, I think we're in agreement here as well. I mean, I think the remake does everything that you expect it to do, you know, without being in any way kind of innovative or different. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's orchestrated with kind of consummate skill and all the right notes are struck, you know, no pun intended, you know, right where you'd kind of expect them. But it does feel a tad formulaic. The original feels like it kind of embraces its limitations in this regard and creates something which is genuinely sort of unsettling and original. It's raw and it's overwhelming and bombards the senses. It creates a kind of visceral reality which is hard to ignore or escape. And so for me, it hits harder and is probably kind of more absorbing and memorable. Well, it is more absorbing and
Mm,
memorable, right? So
yeah.
it's original for me too, dude. Okay, so let's look at kills, scares, and fear factor.
Nice. In both of these films, all of the on screen protagonist kills are attributed to Leatherface. But each film handles these fatalities in very different ways. The original uses its kills like blunt force weapons. You know, they just come out of nowhere, knock you senseless, and leave you reeling. There's no build up, no warning. You're just minding your own. Bam, you're dead. Oh man, what's taking them so long? Maybe I should. Bang, you're dead too. You know, I mean, this sudden and unpredictable proclivity for violence is one of the film's greatest strengths. With the exception of Sally, who is viciously tormented, all of the kills are matter of fact, emotionless affairs. It's just another day at the slaughterhouse for old Leatherface, and it's nothing personal. The remake, however, is far, far more malicious, whether it be in the form of the sadistic Sheriff Hoyt and his brutal treatment of poor Morgan, or Leatherface's savage executions. It's clear that these people are taking pleasure in what they do. And so does the film itself. You know, it lingers on suffering with flashy camera angles and atmospheric lighting, where the first film kind of forces us to endure the torment of its characters, the remake entices us to kind of take a sick pleasure in it, especially in Erin's escape and retribution. And that is something that is missing from the original, for better or for worse. In summary, I think that the original sudden and shocking kills are definitely more impactful. However, the remake offers kind of a lingering tension that you can feel constantly from around the 10-minute mark, and it keeps you on edge throughout, and its kills are far more extravagant and painful. And it's for this reason that I'm going to call this one a draw. Both films do a great job at utilizing their respective methods, and you know it's going to boil down to individual preference as to what people enjoy the most.
Nice. Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with all of that, Lee. And I think, again, you've sort of broken this down in such a great way. For me, as a person who's not really inclined to kind of watching or enjoying like death, torture, you know, sadism, or kind of malevolent acts of evil, I found the remake to be like more unpleasant in a way.
Mm.
I think it takes kind of pleasure in the pain and suffering in a more kind of explicit way. And I'm not sure I care for what it's doing or what it says about the state of the world or like audiences in general. I think the remake seems to delight in its kind of depictions of death and brutality. It wants the audience to almost kind of enjoy the kills and torture in some ways. In some ways, it knows that its audience has come to see that.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it is kind of glorifying death and torture and suffering and showing, it has something to be enjoyed, right? And
Mm.
the original seems to take the approach that this stuff is horrendous. It's
Yeah.
fucking awful, and you like endure it. And the remake seems to be like, look how amazing this leg getting cut off looks, and look how awful this person hanging on a hook and trying to pull themselves off is. Ha ha! What fun we're having. And to that I say, fuck off, Lee. Quite frankly, like, what is your problem? But I give it to the remake simply because I find what it says about our society and culture and how it seems to be kind of pointing us towards enjoying murder and death and torture and kind of injury detail, It's more
That's
disturbing for
yeah.
me, I think.
Yeah, that's a very Haneke way of looking at it, but I like it.
Okay, nice. Okay, so by the way, I'm aware of how prudish all of that sounded. It is just my sort of take as a non kind of horror fan. Anyway, moving on nicely from that, let's discuss which movie had the best Leatherface.
Now, this is another easy one for me, but let's talk a little about the two hulking cannibals before I give my verdict. So, in the original, we have Gunnar Hansen, who imbued the hulking brute with an air of vulnerability. He got scared, he got angry, he cared about his family and their feelings, and basically, he was a character. A believable human being, and in a lot of ways, that made him infinitely more terrifying in my eyes. And the mask too was simple yet effective. It looked like it could genuinely be made out of flayed human skin. And the fact that he has different masks for different occasions just added more depth to the character. And also, there is the iconic tantrum at the climax of the film where Sally, she finally escapes, and Leatherface, knowing that he has failed his family and that his life as he knows it is over, he just kind of thrashes and whirls the roaring chainsaw in the mid morning sun. It's an iconic scene. And now let's look at Andrew Brunowski's take on the classic cannibal. Yes, his version on the hulking Hewitt family enforcer is terrifying. If you had to choose between two leather faces to fight, you would not pick this one. He's powerful, relentless, and physically dominating. But unfortunately, that's pretty much it. And he quickly devolves into a largely one note villain. Yeah, we see him without his mask and learn he was perpetually bullied due to his facial deformity. Yeah, we get a brief scene of him cowering as his mother tells us about his rough childhood. But that's pretty much your lot when it comes to depth. And the mask, mate, the mask is just awful. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is scary, but it looks like he's wearing an elaborate Halloween mask rather than somebody's face. Apart from the scenes where he dons the freshly flayed face, God, try saying that 10 times fast, of poor Kemper. Even the final scene where he takes a passing swing at Erin as she drives away lacks the emotion of the original. He just kind of stares menacingly after her, despite losing an arm and taking a chainsaw to the leg. So to summarize, Brynjarski does a really good job with what he's given, but the prize here, without question, goes to the original.
Yeah, same for me, dude. I mean, it's original all the way.
Mm.
I mean, I totally agree. I think, there seems more depth and range to the original Leatherface. He's more interesting and intriguing as a character and is much more rounded. I kind of, and dare I say it, kind of believable.
Mm.
I mean, Brianowski's Leatherface is a bit of a sort of one note piano, and I think, a tad kind of boring. I think Leatherface in the remake lacks some of the humor of the original as well. I mean,
Yeah.
the Pretty Woman face is pretty amusing in the original. I kind of like a bit of something odd in a villain, right? They need some sort of kooky, slightly humorous edge. So, yeah, man, original all day long for me. Also, Lee, you mentioned something about a lost Leatherface in the last episode. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew Bunyarski was not actually the first choice to play Leatherface. Originally, that honor went to prolific genre actor Brett Wagner. And Wagner spent 4 or 5 days filming before unfortunately suffering an injury during the production, which forced him to step down and led to Brunowski being brought in as a last minute replacement. I mean, Wagner does still get a little screen time. However, it's him behind the iconic mask when Paul Kemper meets his demise. So, despite his extremely short tenure, Wagner can still claim to have played Leatherface on screen.
Wicked, dude. Okay, so next up, we'll take a look at each act of the film sequentially to decide which is the best. Starting, of course, with Act One.
Okay, then. So, looking back at our dissections of both films, we each put the end of Act One just after the first kill or thereabouts. So, that's the benchmark we'll be using here. In the original, it's the definition of a slow boil. Besides the unhinged hitchhiker and the disturbing opening shots, there's little in the way of tension or character building up until that truly iconic first kill. The remake, however, punches us in the face almost immediately with the traumatized girl and her suicide in the van. From there, the tension builds as the group discover unfriendly locals and like a near feral child and a sinister sheriff, all before triggering that first, albeit far less impactful than the original, Leatherface kill. So, which do I think is better? Well, both have their pros and cons. You know, the original slow, somewhat meandering act means that when the first kill is triggered, it slaps us in the face hard. Good screenwriting is all about contrasts and opposites, and the slow build up when it switches gears, it leaves the viewer breathless and stunned. The remake, however, it loses this impact at the cost of a more structured, well paced build up of tension. The inciting incident, it hits hard, and then the tension gradually mounts until that first kill, ultimately giving us a balanced opening with a less impactful first kill. Which is better? I'm going to have to go with the remake on this one. What about you, bud?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to break down the acts of the films in this way and compare them to each other. I'm really torn on this one because I do love structure and I do think having a good grasp of structure and pacing stands you in great stead as a screenwriter. So, as you say, is it better to have balance or is it better to have kind of impact in terms of that first kill? I'm just going to sort of play with something, Lee, and sort of tell me what you make of it. For me, this film is about like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? I mean, that fact is not hidden. So imagine watching the first movie at the time of release, like what's coming, right? It's a chainsaw massacre. Is it better to meander and hit your audience hard, or is it better to build tension and display kind of craftsmanship and balance, but have that first kill of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre be kind of less impactful? Um, so as much as I think, like as much as I love kind of craftsmanship and balance, I'm edging towards impact. I think the original makes the first kill of the massacre more impactful and memorable. Um, I don't like, dude. I don't really remember the first kill of the first like Leatherface kill of the remake, and I only watched it the other day. I mean, I remember like Leatherface smacking that poor dude in the original though. That was like impact.
Hmm.
So part of me says kind of reducing the impact of the first kill of the titular kind of massacre or the titular character of the film is possibly not a great thing to do. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And you're right. The more graphic opening of the remake, it does lessen the impact of the first kill a little. But I think mostly the remake's first kill is just forgettable. It's like you said, it's completely forgettable. But I think a lot of that is in the way it was shot and the immediate aftermath of it, rather than because of the build up to it.
Interesting. Okay. So continuing anyway, I mean, I think the original is quite well balanced when you take all kind of three acts together. It does have this slow first act, but a rip roaring kind of unrelenting final act. So I guess what I'm sort of saying is that it is one thing to compare acts in kind of isolation, but they also need to be compared as a whole, if that makes sense. And another thought I had was, when we read the scripts, I mentioned how the original script, in the original, the descriptions of the villains were sort of much more lovingly crafted than those of the protagonists. And I think that's actually reflected in how the film handles this first act. Leatherface is kind of the star here. I mean, the film was even called Leatherface at one point, right? It wants the impact of seeing Leatherface to hit you hard, hit you like a kind of ton of bricks or like a sledgehammer. Now, the remake has to do something different. We all know what this film is about, and most of the audience has probably seen the original, so it can't have a first act that copies the original film.
Yeah.
There's no tension there, right? So having a different kind of inciting incident and one where we probably are not expecting, I think that's actually really smart. And the remake also has nearly 30 years of kind of screenwriting practice and narrative theory kind of feeding it. It's playing to audiences who are much more savvy and literate when it comes to film. And I think it has kind of smoothed off a lot of the rough edges from the original in terms of adhering more closely to industry practice. So is that better? Personal preference. I think the remake is smart. I think the original is ballsy. And, I do love structure though, dude. So it's tough. But, I think original for me, I think is I just think lessening the impact of that first kill of Leatherface, Leatherface's first kill. It's not a crime, but it's lessening the impact of the film for me. So that's what I think, dude. Original, I think. Okay, so next up, unsurprisingly, Lee, it's Act Two.
Okay, so again, if we're going by the act breaks we decided upon earlier, with the original breaking at around the time Sally is forced into the old man's truck, and the remake taking us up until Erin regains consciousness in the Hewitt house. So in both films, this act is where the majority of the body count can be found, with Leatherface sawing and hammering his way through a slew of unsuspecting victims, and the tension kind of rising to boiling point in both films. The original gives us more sudden, shockingly swift, and brutal kills before culminating in the beginning of Sally's arduous ordeal, where she is relentlessly pursued by Leatherface for what feels like hours. The remake chooses to continually crank up the tension, with Leatherface executing some far more brutal kills, Erin choosing to fight back rather than accept victimhood, and the delightfully evil Sheriff Hoyt torturing Morgan. It's a really tough call for me on this one, so I'm going to call Act 2 a draw.
So tough, isn't it? Um, I think I'm going to call it a draw too, because because I think ultimately these two films are sort of choosing different approaches and trying to do different things. But for me, both these second acts are pretty good. They do what you'd expect and culminate in a pretty satisfying way. So it's a draw for me too, Lee. I hope you're keeping track of all this, dude. Okay, you know what's coming next? By God, it's Act Three.
So then we are on to the final act, the climax, the coup de grace. So in the original, this gives us the truly iconic dinner table scene, the tale behind which is almost as infamous as the scene itself. Sally endures her torment long enough to earn her freedom and make her escape, though there is little catharsis to be found in her manic, psychotic glee at escaping. In the remake, it's time for the Hewitts to immediately reap the consequences of their actions. Erin kills the family patriarch, viciously cripples its enforcer, and successfully rescues a kidnapped child. It's a much more deserved conclusion, which offers the audience a glimmer of hope after the torment they've endured for the past 90 minutes.
I can already tell where this is going.
Yeah, regular listeners will no doubt be aware I do love a dark ending, and there's a reason the original's truly iconic end sequence remains so vivid a presence in the horror landscape. To be honest, the remake's ending, while perfectly fine, has already largely slipped from my memory, so obviously I'm giving this one to the original. How about you, my friend?
Oh, it's the original, dude. Has to be. I mean, I love Erin's kind of deserved escape and that she kicks some ass. But I think ultimately, like you said, it is way less impactful. And there is something truly sinister about the ending of the original. No one gets out of this good, right? There's no bow. It's dark. It's fucked up. I just feel that's what it should be, right?
Yeah. Fucked up trauma survivor for the win. Yay.
Yeah, she's got this crazy look in her eye, right? It's crazy
Yeah.
kind of manic cackle. It's just totally screwed up, dude. Anyway, okay, so let's take a little look at the critical reception of both films and see if there's a clear winner between the two.
Oh, there is most definitely a clear winner here. But before we get to that, let's break down the reviews for both films. So we're going to be looking at each film's IMDb rating, its Rotten Tomatoes score, and its Metacritic rating, each of which was correct at the time of recording this episode. So let's start with IMDb, which users have rated the original a massively impressive 7.4 out of 10. The remake has not proven so well loved, but still currently sits at a highly respectable 6.2 out of 10.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, for a horror movie, those are both pretty good scores, right? They're pretty great scores.
I mean, yeah, with IMDb and horror, I tend to find anything over a 4.55 is usually a pretty damn solid film. So next up is Rotten Tomatoes. So the original is clearly feeling the love here with a whopping 84% tomato meter. God, that's a funny word to say. Tomato meter. And an equally impressive 82% popcorn meter. The remake does not fare well here with a 37% tomato meter and a slightly better 58% popcorn meter. And then finally, Metacritic. Now, this one gives the original its highest rating so far, a staggering 92%, and labels it a must see movie. The remake, however, sits at a paltry 38%. So, far and away, the critical darling of the two and clear winner of this category is the original.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't get much more decisive than that, does it, dude? Okay, next up, Lee, I have to ask, which of the two is your favorite?
Ah, man. I mean, we're talking about two very different films here, each of which has its own appeal and stands tall in its own right. Old school horror fans will always ship the original, as will film buffs and connoisseurs. More casual, younger fans may find themselves more in touch with the remake's snappy pacing and gorgeous visuals. And it's great, I think, that there are these options for the horror fans out there. Having said that, I found that each time I watch the original, I appreciate it just a little bit more. Whereas each time I watch the remake, it diminishes slightly in my eyes. Therefore, unsurprisingly to anyone, I'm sure, my favorite is, of course, the original. How about you?
Yeah, again, it's the original for me. I mean, it's kind of, I think it's more impactful as a film. And, I love like the indie kind of craziness and the stories and all of that. I mean, we're like 50 years out and this film is still kind of iconic, right?
Mm.
The remake, don't get me wrong, like it's perfectly serviceable, but totally forgettable for me. Okay, so finally, before we tally up the scores and announce the winners, are there
Sorry.
any wild cards that you want to award any bonus points for, Lee?
For me, there is, yeah. I mean, the biggest wild card and the best thing about the remake is Arlie Ermy. I mean, he is just so damn good at playing a malicious bastard. He steals every scene he is in and gives the remake an invaluable shot in the arm. In the original, the family mostly come off as incompetent and lucky to not have been apprehended by the law. Their remote location is pretty much all that really works in their favor. The old man even tries his best to steer the kids away because, they're not looking for trouble. With Ermy's Sheriff Hoyt, the family gains a harsh, intelligent, and dominating patriarch who can steer people to or away from the family as needed. Not to mention the fact that the Hewitt family bloodline seems to run long and deep in the backwoods of Texas. They've infested the area like a cancer, and it's only through Aaron's resourcefulness and bravery that they are finally rooted out. But anyways, I've rambled past the point I was trying to make, and my wild card goes to the remake.
Nice, dude. Okay, well, for me, I have to give a wild card to Toby Hooper here. I mean, he directed the ever loving shit out of that originally. I mean, he had the restrictions and must have been compromising all the time. He had the conditions and And the skill and experience of his cast and the crew to deal with, right? Budgetary constraints and, a script that's hard to read, and he made something that, we're still talking about like 50 years later, and something which has entered into our kind of cultural kind of zeitgeist, right? It's
Yeah.
truly iconic. Yeah, I'm telling you, Toby Hooper like directed the shit out of that film and deserves a wild card kind of all day long. So, mine goes to Mr. Hooper and the original.
Right then. So the fight is over. Both fighters stand proud but bloodied, and we've gone to the scorecard. So let's break this battle down. First, the script categories, beginning with the visual appeal presentation. And this one we were split on, and it turned out to be a draw. And then next up came structure and pacing. And this one was a clear winner for the remake. Next was theme and subtext. And while I called this one a tie, your preference tipped this one in favor of the original. And our last script category was dialogue. And you and I were split on this one. There's another draw. And then we moved on to the film categories now. And first up, the other big D, direction. No surprises at all here. We both went for the original. Then it was cinematography and visual style, and we both gave this one to the original. Acting and performances came next, and we both gave this one to the remake. And then it was sound design and score, and we both fell hard for the original's unique industrial metal kind of score. Next up was kills, scares, and fear factor. And while I was torn on this one, your vote for the remake swung it in its favor. Best Leatherface, unsurprisingly, and deservedly went to the original. And next up was the best first act. And while I appreciate your logic, I think this was our first real disagreement, which left us with another draw. But we were quickly back in agreement for Act 2, another draw, and then, of course, we were still in sync with both of us preferring the original Act 3. Critical reception was all over the original, and it wasn't even remotely close. And I think as time progresses and more Texas Chainsaw Massacres are inevitably released, the remake will slip further from people's memory, while that original, as you said earlier, will always stand tall on its own merits. So both of us chose the original as our favorite. My wild card went to the remake, and your wild card went to the original.
Okay, bud. So let's break it down.
Okay, so the winner by a country mile was, probably unsurprisingly, the original, with over twice the wins of the remake. And even if the remake had swung all 4 tied rounds, the original would still have just pipped it to the post. The final scores being the original with 9 wins, there were 4 draws, and the remake had 4 wins. And I think this just goes to show how beloved and universally respected that original is. But hats off to the challenger. It tried its best to stand on its own merits. And while it didn't hold up to the original, I think it's still an entertaining flick. And it's definitely well worth a watch.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that all pretty worked out pretty much as it should. I think it's really, really difficult to remake something as iconic as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you have to try and do something different whilst being respectful, of the original and living up to the sort of the promise of the premise. It's a tough gig, right? I would say if you've got the time and inclination to check them both out and make your judgments, I'd advise you to do that. But if you have to choose, choose the original.
But for now, the winner of the first ever Script to Screen podcast face-off battle is the incomparable, the immortal, the infamous, original classic, Toby Hooper's 1974 perfect movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, nice, man. I love this, Lee. We should do more of these, I think. It was great fun. Okay, so if you enjoyed the podcast, please hit like and subscribe. It's free. And if you're feeling generous, please leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice because it really helps us find new people. Check out our socials. We're on Facebook and Blue Sky and can be reached there. We also publish to YouTube, so you can listen to us there. There are no visuals, but plenty of audio goodness. Let us know if you think the right movie walked away with the title, or any thoughts you had on the episode at our website. That's www.scripttoscreenpodcast.com. We always love hearing from you guys, and we have much more content there, script samples, scareology graphs, all sorts going on. Now, we're also offering script reading services. We will analyze your script and give you tailored feedback on your work. We are also creating pitch decks for projects. We will collaborate with you to create a stunning pitch deck for your project, which you can take out into the world and get pitching. So if that's of interest, go to the website, navigate to the script reading page, and you can get all of the info there. But until next time, do take care.
Time to hang up those gloves until next time. Keep writing those scares.